Okay, so we're going to get started today. You'll notice that instead of just one handout, you got two handouts today. We have our typical exercise handout. We'll go through that in a lot more detail. I'm going to walk you step by step through everything that we're doing today. So that'll come after a short little break after lecture. But the other handout that you got is your assignment 101. This is your first assignment for the class. Remember, your assignments collectively are worth 40% of your overall grade. So this particular one is probably worth about 6%, just if you do the math. So your assignment 101 is your best photograph. Couple quick notes about this. Number one, just because I go through a bunch of techniques today doesn't mean that your photo needs to have every technique applied to it. I'm trying to give you all the different techniques, but your photo is different than everybody else's photo. So you have to decide what makes your photo the best and do those things. It would be very rare, but I guess theoretically possible, that your photo could be so perfect that you didn't need to do any post-processing. I highly doubt it. So my guess is that you're going to do some post-processing. And so this is very much about the perfect photo and the perfect post-processing. So the two go hand in hand. We're going to walk through a lot of those strategies today, so you'll have a lot of the skill sets that you need to move forward. It is due 1 week from today, so it's a pretty quick turnaround, but it's only one photo. So it's not too bad in terms of workload. Your photo needs to have been taken after the start of this semester. So just because you went on this awesome trip over winter break to Prague or something, you can't use a photo from that trip. Does that make sense? So the reason that I do that is it evens the playing field. Everybody has kind of the same geographic spatial stuff to photograph. It makes it relatively even. If you went to Prague, you have an unfair advantage, is my point. Okay? Now, I guess theoretically, if you went to Prague since the start of the semester, I don't know how you would have done that, but if you did, then you could use that photo, I guess. So, photo needs to be taken after the 28th, which was the first day of class. When you're going to do the post-processing, make a note of what post-processing you did on your particular image. When you turn it in, you're going to do two things. Number one, you're going to print a copy of your photo to the school laser printer. It doesn't have to be out at a professional store. It doesn't have to be on glossy photo paper or anything like that. All I'm asking you to do is to print to the C5550, which is the normal color laser printer across the way. I think it costs you like 25 cents to do it. It'll be on an 8.5 by 11, and as long as it's on that 8.5 by 11, I'm happy. If your image is in color, your print should be in color. If your image is in black and white, you should still probably print in color, but you could theoretically get away with printing in black and white and save yourself a little tiny bit of money. But on the grand scheme of things, I'm not asking you for much in this class. So it's very reasonable for you to do that print. Remember, part of the student learning outcomes for this class is that you have the ability to print. So we have to make sure that you get these prints out, etc. The prints are more for reference. I'm not going to actually sit down and grade the prints because the color is going to suck, for lack of a better term. Let's be honest, okay? We're not dealing with color profiling in here, so I'm not expecting the prints to be perfect, but I need you to print it. It's also a backup. Should the website crash or something like that, I still have physical copies of the stuff that you turned in. That being said, what I will grade is the post that you make on the course website. Colors are a lot better on those, so I'll be able to visualize and see what you did a little bit better. In that, you will post obviously your edited final version of the file. No surprise. That's what you're turning in. You will also post your original, so the one without the edits, and you will write a little paragraph telling me what post-processing you did to the image. And if you're totally confused about what post-processing is, don't worry. That's what today's about. So you would say, oh, I did a levels adjustment, and I also adjusted the curves, and I boosted the vibrance of the photo, or something like that. Whatever it is that you did, you would tell me that's what you did. That's part of referencing what you're doing, and that's part of the assignment. All of this is due on the 13th. For those of you keeping track, it's the day before Valentine's Day. And so you'll turn that in. Remember, since this is an assignment, it is due before I start talking next Wednesday. So if you turn it in like right now, next Wednesday, it would be late. Does that make sense? Just trying to be real clear in the first round here. Don't be late. Turn it in on time. So that's your assignment 101. If you have questions about this, let me know. Can it be one of the images that you took for today? Sure, no problem. Maybe you decide that I really didn't like all my images and you want to go out and shoot some new images this weekend. That's totally cool too. Not a problem. It just needs to have happened after the start of this semester. Okay, so we're going to move today and start talking about, if I can unlock things here, post-processing your images and developing a digital workflow. So what do I mean by a digital workflow? The term workflow is used by photographers, and it refers to a set of steps that you commonly go through that generally starts with taking the pictures and ends with doing something with the pictures. And that seems really obvious. But the truth is, depending on who you are as a photographer, the hardware you use, the software you use, there can be a fair number of steps in that. If you just use your phone and you're posting something to Instagram, it could be as simple as take the picture, post to Instagram. Workflow done. Maybe you add a wrinkle in there. Maybe you put a filter in there. Maybe you combine photos together using one of those apps that combines the photos together. That's all part of this same workflow, depending on you, the photographer, and what the intended output is supposed to be. Key components to a workflow. Generally, the workflow obviously has to begin with capturing the image in the first place. And the next step generally involves getting the image into some form of editing software where you can make some tweaks. Does this mean that every photo that I take, and I'll use myself as the example, every photo that I take, I go through and I do some editing tweaks on it? No, I don't have all that time. I have 3 kids. They don't let me do that, as much as it would be fun to do it. When I was first married and I had no kids, and I had no dogs, and I had no house payment, I would sit around and I would edit photos for fun because I liked this. I liked post-processing my images. I liked making the images the best they could possibly be. And it was awesome. And then all that other stuff happened, which is really awesome too, but it took away all the time to do this. So do I do this on every photo? Absolutely not. Do I do this on the occasional really important photo or the really good photo? You bet. Because it does make a huge difference in the quality of the photo long term. So it's not necessarily an every time thing. If you were a wedding photographer, you would do it on every wedding photo that you shot, obviously. Somebody's paying you to do it in that sense. So depending on what it is that you're doing, it may be relevant to do it for all your images, or it may be relevant to just do it for a select few. You're going to get those images into your computer. Remember that whole backup lecture that I talked about? Probably a good time to think about that. Make sure you save those images somewhere. And then, depending on your computer, you're going to download it into some kind of a package, a software package that's going to help you do the editing. And there's a bunch of them out there, and we'll talk about them in more depth as we go forward. Next, you're going to do some kind of post-processing. You're going to correct the images. For me personally, when I take an image, I almost always have to do a levels adjustment. I know that. So that's the first thing I do, is I open up that histogram, do the levels adjustment. Boom, my image is better. That's the most common one for me. Does that mean it's the most common one for all of you? No. Not at all. So you're going to learn that as you start to shoot more and more photos. What are the things that you do? Cropping is another big one. Tweaking that rule of thirds just a little bit. Making sure that crop is just right. That's not a bad thing to do either. Rotating, black and white. Well, I can go on and on and on. And we'll talk about all these a little bit more in depth as we go forward. And then finally, you're going to output your photos. You could print your photos. Some people like to do that. My wife loves to make chapbooks. Anybody heard of those? No, everybody's like, yeah, whatever. Anyway, they're little photo albums that somehow are connected to Instagram. I don't even know how it works, but she does it all the time. That's her desired output. Your desired output might be posting to Instagram. Your desired output might be posting to Snapchat. I don't know. Depends on who you are and what your desired output is going to be. Maybe you do print your photos and stack them up somewhere. That's obviously a valid way of getting an output. Maybe you just save them on a disk for later on. That works too. What is your current workflow? Chances are you probably already have a little bit of a workflow anyway. Chances are when you take your Instagram photos, you have a certain habit of how you post the Instagram photo. Maybe you know that you have to take 10 photos before you get the right one to post to Instagram. Maybe that's the workflow. What kind of software do you plan to use? Always think about how do you back up your images. This is obviously taking it a step out of the I'm just posting to Instagram. This is a little bit more in depth. If I'm going to make some edits, how am I going to back up those photos? Are they safe? Those are good questions to ask yourself. What post-processing do you typically need to do, and or can you automate any of the post-processing techniques? Are there things that make the post-processing a little bit easier and a little bit faster that you can use? and then ultimately how will your photos be used. If you're in the habit of shooting pictures for giant bulletin boards, that's a little bit different than shooting things to post on Instagram. So you need to understand where that output is obviously going to be. So what software are you going to use to post-process your images and deal with your images? Well, we got a bunch of options. First question, of course, would be, what device are you using? And I say in here, are you using Windows or a Mac? Truth is, it's a little more complicated than that by now, because you could be doing it on an iPad, a Samsung tablet, you could be doing it on your phone. There's a lot of different devices. So it's not quite as simple as Windows or Mac. But generally, that's a pretty divisive thing. You're either in the Mac ecosystem, because you're in the iPad world, etc., or you're in the other world, which is mostly Windows, but it could be Android in that as well. Are you on your home computer, your personal laptop? Are you on a lab computer? Are you just online? Do you have an iPad app? What is it that you're using to process those images? And is that software non-destructive in its editing? And this is actually a really important thing that people tend not to think about too much when they edit their photos. The non-destructive editor is essentially the things that you apply to an image, can you reverse them out of order? So if you're doing a post-processing technique and you convert an image to black and white and then you keep working with it for a while, can you go back and turn the black and white off without undoing lots of steps? Furthermore, if you save the file or you save the image, can you still go back and undo it, or is it permanent? Permanent would be destructive editing, where you can't go back and undo things, can't go back to the original file. A lot of photo editing software allows it to be non-destructive. We make edits, we get our output, that's great. We can always go back in and change those edits later on. Generally, the free options out there are good for up to about 10,000 images. You start to get more than that, they get a little cranky. Professional would be 10,000 plus, depending. Software, free options. There's actually a surprisingly large number of free options that are available out there. Some of them are pretty good. This is Google Photos. It gives us some basic editing, which is not bad. It's available at photos.google.com. There are a bunch of presets. Essentially, you upload your image. You've got a bunch of choices on the right side here. You click on the photo. It performs that edit for you. So it's kind of what you see is what you get. Do this, try it out. Do this, try it out. Obviously, you can email it, download it, share it after you've made those edits to it. There aren't really the good advanced editing features. You're not going to see a histogram. You're not going to be able to do a levels adjustment or a curves adjustment. So those are kind of locked out into the higher end software. But of course, it's free. You do need to have a connection to the internet for it to work. No surprise there. And it's semi-destructive. If you're in the app itself and you're performing edits, you can do things out of order and you can turn things back off and back on. But when you go to save that file, those become permanent. So it's not really super destructive because you can adjust it after you save it. It's not so, it is destructive at that point. So something to be aware of when you're using this. Photoshop, what is it? The Photoshop Express Editor. This is Adobe's attempt at giving us an iPad app that can do some photo editing. It's okay. Is it Photoshop? No. But it's okay. It's available for all your devices. It has a bunch of presets, much like Google Photos does, where you basically, you kind of see, oh, I want this to happen to my image. You click on it, and it applies those settings. It has a few advanced editing features, not too many. You do have to have a connection to the internet. It's a destructive editor, and you need to have some kind of a phone or tablet. They used to have a web version where you could just go to photoshop.com and it would load up, but they cut that out. So it's just a tablet app now. Pixlr. Pixlr is a great company that builds two different products. So it's a little confusing when you first go to their website. They have their Pixlr X, which is this one, and they have their Pixlr Editor, which is this one. The Pixlr Editor looks an awful lot like Photoshop. It's almost spot on Photoshop. So you've got both options. The Pixlr X, this one, this first one that I showed you, has a bunch of presets built in, but it has some fairly advanced techniques that are in there. So if you dive in and you look through, you can get some pretty good results out of those, and it's pretty easy. You drag a slider, you see the image change. You don't have to understand too much about that post-processing. The Pixlr Editor version, this one, looks an awful lot like Photoshop, which is a good thing. The big piece that it's missing are adjustment layers. And that's something that's a really big thing in Photoshop that we're going to talk a lot about today when we get to Photoshop. So there's two versions. The editor version is shockingly Photoshop-like. You can save your stuff back to your flash drive just like you opened it in some kind of an application. It's just an online version of it. It does require an internet connection. For the editor version, you have to have Flash installed on the computer. Some people avoid Flash at all costs, but that's the way it works. The Pixlr X does not require Flash. Like I said, it doesn't have any adjustment layers in the editor version as well. Photos is, if you're in the Mac ecosystem, you're gonna have this. It's pretty good. Apple used to have a product called Aperture, which is their professional photographer line, and it was a fantastic piece of software. And I used it and invested a bunch of time in it, and then Apple chopped it. Yeah, I'm a little bitter over that. So they stripped it down into a version for all of us Apple people to use. Truth about it is it has a lot of the advanced editing features built in. It's great at organization, which is good for those of us that need organization. It's a non-destructive editor, which is also good, so we can make adjustments along the way. Is it Photoshop in terms of pixel by pixel editing? No, but it gives us the bulk of what we need in it. The disadvantage, though, is it's iOS, Mac OS only. So if you're in the Windows world, you're kind of out of luck relating to it. It is free as well. Professional options. A couple different professional options here. I'm including something for the first time. I haven't ever included this in my lectures before. It's a relatively new product called Luminar. It's by a company called Skylum. And I would say this is a really good hybrid between kind of the advanced professional options and the free options. It's a little bit, costs about $70 to get it, and it has some incredible features built in. It's built on what they call their artificial intelligence engine, which looks at the image and can selectively make adjustments to your image without you having to mask the image. We'll talk a lot about masking in this class. It's a one-time purchase, so there's no ongoing subscription, which is great. All the professional editing options are available. Curves, histograms, and whatever are there if you want to make those adjustments, but there's a lot of quick adjustments with just some sliders. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. It also works as a standalone app, so you can just open it and edit your photo, or it'll work as a plugin for things like Lightroom, Photoshop, which we'll talk about next, Photos, the Apple app, so you can use it as a plugin on top of your existing photo software. So it's a pretty good option. It's available for both Mac and for Windows. Adobe Lightroom is the real powerhouse professional photography management application. If you were a wedding photographer, you'd use Adobe Lightroom to manage your photo collection. Essentially, Lightroom is a way of organizing your pictures. It's a way of backing up your pictures. It's a way of keeping track of your pictures when you're a professional and you have 50,000 images. You need something like this. It has a lot of the very advanced editing features that you would see in Photoshop are baked right into Lightroom, so you don't actually have to leave Lightroom, though you could if you wanted to. So it's kind of convenient. You're obviously, however, stuck with the Creative Cloud license. So you're paying for that every month to get access to something like this. So it is there. It is considered kind of the gold standard of photo editing software and or organizational software. So I like to point it out. And then we're going to end with all of my software choices with Adobe Photoshop itself. And I saved this one for last because this is what we're going to work with in this class extensively. Photoshop is the best for what it does. Photoshop is not about organizing your photos. It's about editing your photos. And so you have the biggest, finest level of control of your image down to pixel by pixel color correction of an image if you wanted to. If you want to change things, this is where you would do it, and this is where you're going to learn the most in terms of how to make your images great. Downside, expensive. If it's part of the Creative Cloud subscription, if you're on the student plan, it's not quite that bad, but it's still, you start doing the math at $20 a month times 12 months, you're at $240 a year. You start doing that year after year, you can see that this gets expensive long term. So that's the downside of it. But it is there, and you can get it with the most updated version. It is completely non-destructive. You can turn on and turn off your corrections in and out of order. You could do things using adjustment layers, which is what we'll talk a lot about in this class, which is simply being able to turn on and turn off an adjustment altogether in any order. The work is always stored on layers, Layers can be combined through different blending modes, which is another thing we'll talk at length about in this class next lecture, as how blending modes work. Fantastic way of making adjustments. Pixel level correction, you can use clone stamp to copy one part of an image over to another part of an image. You have brushes, you have different ways of applying these things. It's just a really advanced editing program. The disadvantage of Photoshop itself is that there is no organizational structure to Photoshop. So you can't have it manage your albums or manage your photos as a big package. It's a one-on-one editor. You open the image, you edit that image. You open another image, you edit that image. So it's not about organization, it's about editing the image itself. Organizing images. So this is really easy if you use one of the photo management applications, i.e. Photos on the Mac or Lightroom or something like that. But essentially, a couple key things to point out. Number one, we take digital photos, and in the world of digital photos, when you snap a picture, there's a bunch of information that's stored in the file itself. It's kind of like in the old days. Maybe you had an aunt, and I always pick on my aunt because she did this. She still does this. When your great aunt takes a photo, right, like with film, you know that little orange date that shows up in the corner of the picture? Okay? That is essentially stamping the date on the picture. I took this picture on this date. Well, the cool thing in the digital world is we can still do that, but it doesn't actually show up on the picture. So contained within the JPEG file, or whatever the raw file, whatever it is that you took the file with, is a bunch of information that's called metadata. It's extra data about the photo. And so I've pulled up this. This is actually back in the old days from Lightroom, from Apple's Aperture. But this is a bunch of the metadata that's included in this image that I shot. So we can start with the fact that the date is stamped into the image. So we can tell that I took this in 2008, yes, long time ago, right? We can tell exactly what time I took it, down to the second. And we can tell what size the file was right there. We can tell how large the file was. We obviously have a name to the file, no surprise. But then up here we have even more information. So right here we can say that it was shot with my Nikon D80, which was my camera at the time. We also have an ISO of 125. We talked about what ISO means. That's the sensitivity of the sensor. We can tell what the lens was set at. We can tell what our exposure value was. We can tell what our aperture was. And we can tell what our shutter speed was. All of that information is stored within the file. So we have this information. Now that we take pictures mostly with our phones as opposed to digital SLR cameras, there is other information that's stored in your image. Things like where you shot the picture geographically, because your phone has a GPS in it. You guys all know when you first open up the phone, you first open up the camera app for the first time, it says, do you want to allow the camera app to use your location? And of course everybody says, yeah, whatever. Well, you're essentially saying, yeah, go ahead and tag every one of the pictures that I take with exactly where I took it. That's what it does. So it's capturing even more metadata, extra data, inside of your photos, which is a really cool thing. And allows for some great organizational strategies long term. So there's, of course, a variety of organizational strategies that you can use. Albums, events, faces, places are examples. They're called different things in different software packages, but you get the general idea. Albums are essentially groups of photos that you manually go in and select. All of these things belong in this album. It's kind of the old school way of having like a photo album where you put the photos in the album, right? Your mom probably did this at some point. It's kind of similar to a folder. All of this stuff goes in that folder because it belongs to that particular project. It's generally manual organization. There are some ways of doing smart folders, like all of the photos that I rated 5 stars put in a folder or put in an album. All of the photos that are of this geographic location put in a folder. You can do some of that kind of stuff. Events is a great thing that came out, probably 10 years ago in the photo management world. And this is the idea that, generally speaking, we don't take an even number of photos over time. So I don't take 1 photo per minute all day long, consistently like that. I go somewhere, I take a group of photos. Then there's a break, and then I go somewhere else, and I take another group of photos. Well, computers are smart enough to realize that generally the groups of photos belong together. And they're not just random. So computers can figure out that, this event where I took a bunch of pictures of a birthday party, all kind of belong together. And then the next day I went to DVC and I took a bunch of photos of campus. Well, those will kind of all belong together. So it's a way of kind of automatically organizing your files together. And you could specify time durations and that sort of thing. But it's a good way of keeping things organized. Facial recognition is also at the point where it's pretty easy to run facial recognition on any photos. This happens in Facebook. This happens in Google. This happens all over the web. It's not a surprising technology, though it's kind of one of those interestingly creepy technologies that companies don't really like to tell you they do much of, but they do it all the time. And the idea here is that we can tell who various people are in a photo. And once you've trained your software, this is this person, it can recognize you in the rest of the photos. Interestingly enough, it doesn't work particularly well with young kids because they grow so much and change so much. So it's hard to keep those things separate. But once you have kind of an established facial structure, it's pretty easy for computers to keep track of who you are. Places. These are photos based on geographic location. All the photos that I shot at DVC campus, they're going to show up on a map. There's all the photos that I shot at DVC. Typical adjustments. Now we're starting to get into things we're going to start talking about today. So the first one, probably the easiest one to go through, is the crop and resize your image. You're essentially re-looking at the photo that you took, and you're saying, I want to crop this so that it now follows better one of those compositional techniques that we talked about last class. So you might be cropping to reposition the rule of thirds. You might be cropping to get a stronger diagonal, those kinds of things. Generally, you can only make the image smaller, however. You can't suddenly make the image bigger. Computers can't magically fill in pixels and give you more detail. The image at its full resolution is the image at its full resolution. Truth is, most of the cameras capture way more information than you really need, so you can make it smaller and not cost too much and still get a great final result out of an image. So here we are in Photoshop doing a crop. Notice that when we do the crop, the rule of thirds grid shows up to help us do that crop. Just a variety of examples. Doesn't matter the format of the image, 4x6, 8x10, square, all of those are still relevant. You can still follow the rule of thirds in those. I love this image. I wish that was me working. It would be fantastic. Notice really strong rule of thirds composition. Great, great image. Exposure. So we can go in and adjust improperly exposed images after the fact. Remember what I said last class, though. If you shoot in RAW format, you have a much better chance at making this adjustment than you do if you shoot and just have a JPEG. And I showed you that example last class. So essentially, you can always lighten your dark images, or you can darken your light images, depending on the exposure. The lightening of dark images will almost always work, no matter whether it's a JPEG file or a RAW file. It doesn't make any difference. The opposite, when you're darkening the light images, this is where you need that RAW file. Otherwise, it's not going to do much. So it's definitely something to be aware of. So we have the dark image. We want to make it light. It's that kind of an adjustment. Brightness and contrast. Adjust the overall brightness of the image. Adjust the image so that you have a stronger contrast between the lights and the darks of the image. The truth is, this is a really heavy-handed tool. It's like, wanting to work in fine carpentry and getting out a sledgehammer. Like, it's just a little bit too much. And so we're going to try to do finer adjustments instead. We're going to try to do levels and curves, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more, instead of doing the brightness and contrast. But it is there, and we can do some kind of wholesale, large-scale adjustments with it. Color, saturation, vibrance. This is adjusting the colors in an image. If we were correcting for white balance, if the image was too blue, we would be doing it with this kind of an adjustment. You could tint a specific image. You could skew an image to have more of a certain color in it if you wanted to. You can also add more saturation or vibrance to an image. So there's a big difference between saturation and vibrance, and I think this slide illustrates it really well. We have the option to do both in Photoshop. So saturation is how strong the colors are in an image. So we can boost how strong all of the colors are in an image using that saturation adjustment. And you see on the left here, with the saturation adjustment, we've certainly boosted the greens, we've boosted the blues, but we also boost all the skin tones. And so people look like they had a really bad accident in the spray tanning bed. Sorry, buddy. The point is that it's boosting those skin tones kind of in a way that is not really what we wanted. Vibrance, on the other hand, recognizes that you want to boost colors, but you don't want to turn everybody into an Oompa Loompa. So we ignore the skin tones. We ignore the oranges, right, and the tans, and we move the rest of the colors to have more saturation. So the vibrance is essentially for whenever people are in the photo. So you don't use the saturation when people are in the photo, you use vibrance instead. And it's going to boost the colors without boosting the skin tones. Converting to black and white or sepia tone. Sepia tone is simply a black and white image that has a kind of brownish tint to it. You've seen this, I'm sure, before. You're essentially taking your original image and you're making it into black and white or making it into brown and white as a choice. Something that's really important, sometimes your camera has the ability to shoot in black and white, or you can convert to black and white. You can turn on black and white mode on your phone. Don't do it that way because you're stripping out a lot of color information. It is far better to shoot in color and to do the black and white processing afterward. And I'm going to show you today, we're going to convert images to black and white. That's one of the things I'll teach you today, how many different ways there are to convert an image to black and white. And how you can get strong, different results out of the same image if it's a color image and you're converting to black and white. If you just have the black and white image, you can't make that adjustment afterward. It'll make a lot more sense when I do it live for you a little bit later on. Focus. So we can add a little bit more definition. Sometimes it's called definition, depends on the software that you're using. You can sharpen an image to make sure the edges stand out just a little bit more. You could also blur the edges of an image if you wanted, just a little bit. You cannot correct, however, a blurry image. So let's say that I ran out and I took a picture of my daughter and I was really excited about it and she moved a little bit in the photo and it was blurry because she wasn't staying still, which is quite normal for her. She won't stay still no matter what you try to make her do. It's a little blurry. I can't go back in and go into focus or sharpen and get her to stand still. Doesn't work. So you can't make adjustments that are going to correct an image. So if it's blurry, it's always going to be blurry. However, if you have an image and you want to just tweak it a little bit, you want to add a little bit more definition to it, this is a good place to go. These are two examples. The image on the left doesn't have the definition applied or the sharpening applied. The one on the right does. It's really hard to see on a projector. If you look at the slides later on, you can see a little bit better. But essentially, the definition in between the pages, there's a little bit better contrast between them, and the pages' edges stand out just a little bit. So it's a small adjustment. It's not a big adjustment. Red eye reduction. You guys have seen red eye before, right? In your photos? Anybody know why that happens? No? A little bit? Anybody want to take a guess?
Flash and lighting.
Flash and lighting, that's pretty close. Exactly. You guys are both on the right track. So essentially what happens in red eye is you are in a dark room and you go to take a picture of somebody. Okay? You get your camera out and you snap that picture. Your flash goes off and the flash illuminates the person's face. At the same time, recognize the people were in a dark room, so their irises are wide open in their eyes because they're adjusted for the dark room. The flash comes in and the light actually penetrates the eye and bounces off the back wall of your eye and comes back out. That red is what you're seeing in the red eye. So there's ways of getting rid of it. You've all seen the flash where it flashes a couple times before and then you take the actual picture, right? The red eye reduction flash. Essentially what that's doing is it's causing the iris to shrink down as it's exposed to the light. Therefore, much less light can enter the eye and you're not going to get the reflection. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to change the position of the flash relative to the camera. So you guys have probably been to a wedding before, right? And at a wedding, there's a wedding photographer running around taking pictures of people. They're not taking pictures with their iPhone. They're taking pictures with a big camera, and there's some big flash that's like mounted on the side, or it's like angled up and bouncing off the roof, or something like that, right? When that flash is further away from the lens, it can't go directly into the eye and come back at the camera. So you're illuminating the scene without going directly into somebody's eyes and coming back at the camera. So you're not going to get red eye that way. So it's another mechanical way of getting rid of red eye. Now, of course, we could go in with Photoshop and get rid of red eye no matter what. So it doesn't matter. So if you ignored all of that, you could post-process it out in Photoshop and get rid of it. Levels. We're going to cover levels a lot today. Levels is a huge, huge way to make your photos better. Not every image has a levels adjustment that can be applied to it, but many of them do. So I'm going to flip back and forth between slides because sometimes you have to see it. The other thing is when I actually do the live demo, it will make a lot more sense. But on a levels adjustment, sorry, wrong direction, we have two photos. The one on the left is the original photo, and the one on the right is the one that's had the levels adjustment applied to it. So as I look at the original photo here, and I was scanning the photo and kind of squinting at it, this would probably be even easier to see if it was black and white, I'd say, okay, well, where in this original photo is true white, like pure white? Well, there's a couple spots that are close. Maybe right there, there's a little spot on the wall that's kind of white. Maybe that is a little bit white. Maybe this here is a little bit white. But is it really truly bright white, like bright white paper white? No, it's kind of like a gray, right? I could do the same thing with black. I could look at this image and I could say, okay, well, what's black? Well, maybe that spot is a little bit black. Maybe there's a shadow in here that's a little bit black. But is it truly black black? Like dark, dark black? No, it's kind of like dark gray. So what I can do with a levels adjustment is I can say, okay, take this light spot and tell the computer that that light spot is actually pure white. So I've lightened that up to be pure white. Then I could take the black spot here and I could say, you know what, that black spot right there, I want that to be pure black. And so we're redistributing the pixels, saying this is now pure white and this is now pure black, rather than kind of light gray and dark gray. That can all be seen, if I jump back a slide, using a histogram. And so this thing here, this graph, is what I'm referring to as a histogram. This represents the pixels in an image. So as I look at this, ignore the color parts for just a second, but this graph here that's in gray, that looks like that, that represents the number of pixels at any given value of gray. So if I came in here and went to like 50% gray, let's say right there, and I counted the number of pixels and stacked them all one on top of each other, that would be the number of pixels at that value of gray. If I came over here to a little bit lighter gray and I counted all the pixels in my image, oh, I have a lot of them right there. So it's just telling me the distribution of pixels. It's also telling me that white, let me erase this for a second. It's also telling me that the lightest color that I have is right there. And the darkest color that I have is right there. That's very different from true white and true black at either end. So what I end up doing in a levels adjustment is I tell the computer, take pure white and pull it over to be right here where my graph ends. That's now pure white. Take pure black and pull it over, oops, to right there, and that's now where black starts. This will make a lot more sense when we do it live. So I will do it, but I want to try to verbally talk through it with you as well. And so that's how we're going to do a levels adjustment on a particular image. Not every image has a histogram that looks like that. Sometimes they have pixels that go all the way from white to black, in which case a levels adjustment isn't relevant. And you're going to find that today when you open up some of your own images. So curves is essentially a way of selectively adjusting certain parts of your image without adjusting other parts of your image. Curves is really hard to explain verbally. Essentially, trust me, this is a curves adjustment. We have the image on the left without the curves adjustment. We have the image on the right. The image on the right looks better, correct? That's a curves adjustment. I'll tell you how to do it when we do it live, because it'll make a lot more sense. Another example here of a curves adjustment. Images are very close, but there's some subtle tweaking with that curves adjustment. And I'll explain the graph, etc., when we get to it. And then finally we get to our final results and our exporting. Whether you're posting to Facebook or saving them on your home computer, you're thinking about how do you save that image and where's it going to go long term. And then you're also potentially posting it on web gallery somewhere where other people could view it. Maybe you're posting it on your website. I'm not that sure. Okay, so that's going through the fundamentals of the post-processing, what we're going to do. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here for about 10 minutes. It's 8:50. We'll come back at 9, and I'll start with the lab part of the demo. And I'm going to spend the first half hour of the lab actually walking you through step by step all of these different techniques. We're going to end up, and you can see this on your exercise 104 handout, we're going to end up picking 3 images and doing a bunch of post-processing to those 3 images. Don't pick 3 of the same image, right? Pick from different categories because you're going to learn more. Because not every adjustment applies to every image. So different images will teach you more about it. Make sense? So make sure you have those images when you come back. If you need to go grab a coffee or whatever, now's the time. And yeah, come back in about 10 minutes. Okay, so we're gonna get started with your exercise 104. This is a little bit different than we've done because this is the first live demo that you guys are seeing as part of the class. This will start to become much more standard, where I lecture for a while first. We talk about big concepts, then we sit down and we actually do some work on our computers. Sometimes we'll spend more work just doing the demos and I won't lecture so much. Like next class when we do blending modes, the lecture is literally like 12 slides, and then we do all of our time in demo mode. But this is where I show you how to do the techniques that we're talking about. And there's lots of ways of cross-referencing the stuff that I'm talking about. You'll see on your part 1 of your handout that essentially when I do the first step, I'm doing what I call Photoshop 1.1 black and white. When I do that, I reference the tutorial that's written about Photoshop 1.1. So if you go to tutorials and you go to Photoshop and you do Photoshop 1.1 black and white, this will give you a step-by-step of what I'm doing. There is also a little video tutorial. It's a ways, I did it a while ago. And then here, make sure you are logged in because sometimes the images get blocked out if you're not logged in. But it'll go through and it'll give you little screenshots and detailed information about what I'm doing. That's obviously not a substitute for me doing it live in front of you. I'm not going to just point you, just do it that way. No, because I want to do it live, and that way if you have a question or something doesn't make sense, sometimes the live explanation makes more sense than the non-live explanation. So that's there. It's under tutorials. You guys may have figured out by now that our lectures are posted here. So this was today's lecture 104. Generally it says this, lecture not available for this semester just yet, but it gives you links to all the previous semester's lectures. So while you're waiting for this, if you needed to reference something that I talked about, you could go back and check one of the previous semester's lectures. They're there. These are all lectures that are posted on YouTube. If you want to go directly to YouTube, that's cool too. There's a course YouTube playlist section right here. And this will, I have to update the links. These are the links from last semester. But essentially, it'll take you to YouTube, and I make a playlist of every semester so that you can see all the lectures as they go through. That was last semester. This semester only has the first couple. Remember that mistakes do happen when I record the lectures, like last class, in this class, lecture 103, forgot to record the video of the screen, just audio only. So I didn't bother posting that. It does happen, so I make mistakes along the way. So that one won't be in there, but you can obviously look back and see the semester before. They're all there. And I just like to try to point that out so that you guys know and are aware that it's there. So we're going to start today talking about Photoshop. We're going to open Photoshop for the first time, and we're going to work through kind of the basics of Photoshop. I'm going to go through a variety of techniques as we go forward here. First thing I always like to do when I open a software application for the first time for you is I like to go through what's happening on the screen. What are we seeing? What's the interface look like? So essentially what I did is I double-clicked on the Photoshop application, which is right here on the desktop. You could, of course, also go to the Start menu and find it that way, but it is on the desktop. You'll double-click Photoshop, which will open up and look like this. A couple other things that I'm attempting to play through with you guys to see how it works. I did it for my last class on Monday. I have a kind of a helper agent running that highlights where my mouse is on the screen. It gives you that yellow circle. So hopefully that makes it a little easier for you guys to see what I'm clicking on and what I'm doing. Furthermore, down at the bottom here, when I start typing things, hi, whatever, it's going to show up there so you can see what I'm typing. So when I type stuff, it's going to be there. So I can do stuff like hi mom or whatever. Okay? You guys get the idea. So that's there to help you, I hope. If you find it really annoying, tell me, because I'm always trying to do new things to make it a little bit more accessible for everybody. So let's talk about Photoshop as we start to work in the world of Photoshop. Photoshop will look like most of the Adobe applications. They all kind of look the same. We have our typical menu structure at the top. We have our file menu, etc. I will reference those when necessary. Below that, we have a contextual ribbon that changes based on what tool is selected. So right now I have the rectangular marquee tool selected, so I get options relating to the rectangular marquee tool. If I were to switch to the brush tool, for example, I would get options relating to the brush tool. If I were to switch to the crop tool, I'd get options relating to the crop tool. So that contextual ribbon is always going to change based on whatever the active tool is. And this is the same for all the Adobe products, where that top ribbon is going to change. Down the left side here, I have my most commonly used tools. We'll go through what a lot of these tools are down the road, and I'll point them out as we go. I'm not going to tell you what each one is, because you won't remember what they are until we need them anyway. When we get down here, there are also two colored squares. We have what is called a foreground color and a background color. These are our ways of dealing with color in Photoshop. If we want to apply a color or paint with a color, we'll get to doing that a little bit later on in the semester. But there are generally two colors available, what's called a foreground and what's called a background color. And we can flip between those. So on the right side over here, I have a panel that's currently showing color and swatches at the top here. And below that, I have a panel showing layers, channels, and paths. We're not going to work too much with the color and the swatches just right now. We are, however, going to do a little bit with layers today. But we'll do a lot more as the semester goes on with layers. When I first open up Photoshop, it gives me a few other things, like the Learn Photoshop section and the Library section. I'm not going to use those, so I can go ahead and minimize that to the side. If we look at the right at the very top here, there's two little sideways arrows, and I can collapse that down into just these little side icons. That just saves me a little bit of space. Right up here, there is also, this is below the minimize, maximize windows. It's in the next row down. There is the second option over, is kind of like a computer with a rectangle in it. These are what are called workspaces that Photoshop has set up for you. And so depending on what it is that you're doing in Photoshop, you can switch workspaces and have different things show up automatically for you. You could, of course, go to the window menu and choose to have anything showing up that you want. But this is kind of like a preset. So I'm going to ask you today to switch from this Essentials workspace down into the Photography workspace. And you can see when I do that, things change just a little bit. And my organization here changes just a little bit. I'm getting the histogram at the top, which is that graph that I was working on a little bit earlier. I still get the libraries. We're not going to worry about libraries, but contained within that tab is also adjustments. And we'll work with those. And then down here, I also have my Layers tab open. So now that I have all of those kind of set up, one more time, I went here and I went to the Photography workspace. Now it's time to go ahead and open up one of my images. I'm going to open up 3, 4, 5 images because I want to show you on different images the same thing. So I'm going to do a lot of repetition. You're going to be picking just 3 images to work with. I'll go ahead and go to the File menu. I'll come down to Open. And I have my images stored on my flash drive, actually technically in my OneDrive, under Exercise 104. Your images might be somewhere else. And I'm going to go ahead and open all of the images that I have here because I'll flip back and forth between them. You can open just one to start. That's fine as you go through. Remember that when we do these post-processing techniques, not all of the post-processing will apply to all of the images. That's OK. That's to be expected. So I'm going to jump over to my first image right here. I'm going to click on the rectangular marquee tool just to get the crop tool to be gone. And I want to talk through what I'm going to do with this image first. So first off, as I'm looking at this image, it's not filling up my whole screen. So I'd like it to be a little bit bigger. And I can do that by zooming in and zooming out. Or I can zoom to fit in the window that I have. Those are all available as keyboard shortcuts. Control, if I hold down the Control key and I press plus, it will zoom in. If I hold down the Control key and I press minus, it will zoom out. If you're on a Mac, it would be the Command key instead of the Control key. The other option that I have is to hold down the Control key and press the equal sign. And that will get me to, sorry, not the equal sign, it's Control 0. My brain wasn't working right there. And that will zoom to fit your entire window. So Control 0. So you have Control plus, Control minus to zoom in and zoom out, and Control 0 will fill the screen with your image. So if I went to this next image, for example, and I press Control 0, it would fill the available space. Same thing here, Control 0, that would fill the available space. Control 0, Control 0, Control 0. OK, so I'm going to start with this first image. And the first little walkthrough that we're going to do is to convert an image to black and white. That's where I'm going to start. And I'll do this multiple times. So don't if you get lost, that's OK. I'll repeat myself. That's OK. So what I'm going to do, or what I'm not going to do, is come up to Image and go to Mode and say Grayscale. OK, that's what people tend to do when they convert to black and white. Oh, yeah, go ahead and discard. Done. Now, did you notice that there was a thing that popped up that said discard? That's probably not a good thing. Whenever you're throwing stuff away in Photoshop, that's probably not a good thing. So instead of doing our black and white like that, I press Control Z, by the way, to undo what I just did. Instead, we're going to do this on an adjustment layer, and we're going to do it a little bit differently. So I'm going to go up to the Layer menu here, and I'm going to come down and select New Adjustment Layer. And I'll come over here, and I'm going to do the Channel Mixer Adjustment Layer. So that's Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Channel Mixer. And I'll go ahead and click on Channel Mixer. When it comes up here, it's going to give me this new layer dialog box. I can choose what to name it. Naming it Channel Mixer 1 seems appropriate for right now. I could also call this black and white. Something like that. And then I could go ahead and say OK. Now, once I do that, you'll see over here in my layers, I have a layer for background. That's the image itself. And then on top of that, I have a layer. This is an adjustment layer for black and white. The adjustment is controlled by this Properties tab right here. So what I want to do to convert to black and white is in this Properties tab of the adjustment layer, I'm going to check this box for monochrome right there. Notice that when I checked that box, it didn't present any kind of discard information. That's a good thing. So I'm going to check that box for monochrome, and I'm going to look at my image. I'm going to say, OK, it's not too bad. However, there's a bunch of fine-tuning that I can do to this particular image. I'm going to do it using the presets. So right here under the Properties, I'm going to move down to Preset, and you'll see it currently says Custom. I'm going to change that, and I'm going to run through all of my various options. First option here would be black and white infrared. OK, the black and white file changed a little bit. Let me move down to black and white with a blue filter. OK, that changed a little bit too. And I'll keep running through. And as I start to run through, you'll see that each time the black and white image changes just a bit. Now, there's a pretty good chance that one of the images is going to look better than the others, or one of the presets is going to cause your image to look better than the others. What these presets are doing is they're allowing you to control how the color image is converted to black and white. And they're mimicking, if you were doing traditional black and white photography, you might put a special colored filter or lens on top of your lens that would change how the camera was seeing light. This is attempting to mimic the same thing. So this gives us a really easy way of kind of jumping through our image to get a better quality black and white, rather than just saying, yeah, convert it to black and white using whatever settings you want. So rather than messing with the actual channel mixer here, which you could do, I'm going to suggest that you just cycle through the presets and pick the one that makes your image look the best to you. So I'm going to do that same thing again. I'm going to move over to the next image here. Why you would make a sunset black and white, I'm not quite sure, but it's a good illustration. So I'm going to go ahead and go up once again to the layer menu. I'm going to come down to new adjustment layer, and I'm going to choose channel mixer. I will call this layer black and white. And I'll go ahead and say OK. Once again, I have the background, and I have my black and white channel mixer layer. On the channel mixer here, I'm going to turn on monochrome to convert it to black and white. And then I'm going to jump through my presets. I'll start with infrared. And actually, this one shows quite the contrast with my different options. So maybe I end up liking one over the other. Maybe I like that one the best out of the ones that I saw. That's then my black and white image. One more time. I told you I was going to repeat this over and over. That's part of learning. We'll go back up to my layer. I'll go to New Adjustment Layer, Channel Mixer. I'm going to rename this to be black and white. I'll say OK. I will turn my channel mixer to monochrome, and then I'll cycle through my presets until I find a version that I like. So I think for me it was the orange filter. I think it was that one that I liked the most. When I'm done, I've finished converting the image to black and white. So that is essentially walking our way through the first part, Photoshop 1.1, converting an image to black and white. I'm not going to worry about saving my images. We're going to come back and save the images later on because they're all going to be created using layers. So we can turn on and turn off the adjustments that we performed at will. I'm going to move on to the next piece, which is Photoshop 1.2, or levels adjustments. So in this case, remember, I'm in the photography workspace. And when I'm in the photography workspace, in the upper corner, I can see my histogram. That was that graph of the distribution of pixels from white to black. So in this particular image, for example, I can see that my histogram has images that are very close to white, but not very close to black. And for illustration purposes, I'm going to leave this in black and white because it's easier to see. So in this case, my closest images to white would be right here where the sun is. And my closest images to black would be maybe down here in the sand shadows. But they're really not black. They're dark gray. So I want to change that and make that adjustment. I'm going to do that by once again going to the Layer menu, coming down to New Adjustment Layer, only this time, instead of picking Channel Mixer, I'm going to pick Levels. It's the second one down. And when I pick the Levels adjustment, and this time I'm just going to leave it called Levels 1. That's just fine. I'll say OK. And you'll see that my properties here for the levels adjustment are different. This time I'm seeing my histogram rather than those color sliders. And so all I need to do to perform that levels adjustment is I need to choose where the black point is and where the white point is. And I'm going to do that using these little upward facing arrows. And I'll take the black point, the one on the left here, and I'm going to click and drag it over to where the graph starts to go up. Right about there. And so what I've done is I've taken the dark gray areas of the image and I've said, no, those are actually black. And you can already see that the image is very different than it was. You can toggle between these by turning on and off the layers. So over here in the Layers palette, there's a little eyeball next to my layer. If I were to click on that eyeball, it turns on and turns off my adjustment. Likewise, I can turn on and turn off black and white. So you can see the levels adjustment without the black and white applied to it. It still changes the overall image. Now in this particular case, the white already is kind of right at the white point. So there's not much to adjust for the white part of this line. You know, could I move it over ever so slightly? Yeah, maybe. By the way, if I were to move it too far, you can see what happens where the whole sky turns white. Likewise, if I were to move the black over too far, all the shadows turn black. You can skew the middle value if you wanted to with this middle, and you can drag and kind of make the overall image darker or lighter as well. Generally, I don't touch the middle value, but it's worth pointing out. And there are some specific cases where that can be useful down the road. So let me jump over to the next image. So here we are in the sunset. I can quickly look up at the histogram here. I'm going to turn that off from black and white and say, OK, well, there is a tiny little bit here of white right where the sun is. But I could do a levels adjustment for the shadows. So let me go ahead and go into my layer menu. I'll come down to new adjustment layer, and I'll go to levels. And I'll say OK. And I will pull the dark value over to where the graph starts to go up. And the white value, there's not a whole lot I can do with the white value. I could pull it over just a little bit, maybe about there. That's about it. But my graph kind of goes all the way to the edge. See if I can find one. All right, here's one. Let's see here. Yeah, I've got two options here, just to show you. So this one, as I look at the graph, my black, I have almost perfect black right there. When it comes to white, I have almost perfect white in the highlights here. So if I look at my histogram, my distribution of pixels is pretty well resolved. So there's not too much I could do with a levels adjustment. So levels don't always apply. In this case, I could go up to my layer, new adjustment layer, and I could go to levels. And I'll say OK. Black's not going to change at all. White could shift over just a little bit, but it doesn't change much of the overall image. So sometimes it's really relevant, and sometimes it's not. So out of the 5 images that I picked up, the first 3 all have adjustments that could be applied. The first 4, but these last 2 don't. Same thing here. My distribution is such that I have black to white. Not much I can do. So just be aware that not every time a levels adjustment is necessary or will do much. I'm going to ask that you try to do a levels adjustment on all your images and see. It's a good way of practicing. So I'll do it one more time for this image, just for practice here. Let me turn off the black and white. I'll go up to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. I'll go ahead and say OK. And I will adjust the black over just a little bit, and I'll adjust the white over just a little bit. So again, not too much of an adjustment on this particular image, just a little bit on either side. So we're going to move next into the pop tutorial, which is Photoshop 1.4. And in Photoshop 1.4, we're going to try to bring out some more color in our images. Did I skip? Oh, I skipped 1.3. Sorry. My bad. Thanks. See, this is where, if you weren't here and you were just listening online, you would miss the ability to tell me, oh, wait a minute, you forgot. Okay? So that's a good point. So Photoshop 1.3, curves. Thank you. So curves, adjustment. Same thing, and this is where I told you with curves, it was really hard to explain what happens. I'm going to try to do it live so that you can see it as I make these adjustments. So we'll start with this image here. I'm going to go up to my layer, new adjustment layer. Do you guys get that the repetition of this? It's always layer, new adjustment layer, something. So this time we're going to pick curves. And we're going to leave it called curves 1. There we go. And so the curves properties is a little bit different than the levels property, though it's kind of similar. So in the curves, what I have is I have a diagonal line that goes, if we were using math terms, from like 0, 0 off at a 45-degree angle up to this point. This graph is representative of the colors from dark to light that are in my image. So same kind of thing, and you can see behind it there's a little histogram that helps show where those colors are. Essentially with curves, I can adjust this line and affect the image in specific ways. So if I were to click a point right in the dead center, I could then drag that point and adjust my image such that the overall image was becoming a little bit darker, or the overall image was becoming a little bit lighter. You can see that starting to happen here. If I left this point right at the center, for example, and I created another point down here in the shadows, and I took that point and I dragged it down a little bit, it's going to darken the dark areas of the image without doing much to the light areas of the image. See how it's adjusting just, sorry if I can move it, it's adjusting just the shadowy part of the image, but not the sky. Likewise, if I were to create a point up here at the top, I would be adjusting just the sky, but not the shadows. So I'm selectively adjusting certain parts of the image. Now, if I go too far, I'm going to get really whacked out results. So be aware of that. So this is generally a subtle adjustment. Generally speaking, a curves adjustment to an image is going to look slightly like an S. So if we look at this on the side, it's a very small S curve. So that's a good place to start, generally speaking, with a curves adjustment. So let me do a curves adjustment on this image. So I'll go up to my layer, new adjustment layer, curves. Same thing. There's my distribution. I'll click and set a point at the center. And then I'll take this point here, and I'm going to pull this one down just a little bit, which is going to darken up and deepen the shadows. I'll set a point and lighten up that sky just a little bit. And we can now see it before and after. So it's still hard for you guys to see it on the projector. It's far more noticeable when you do it on your computer. That's where this takes practice, and you need practice doing it. Remember, your exercises are about experimentation. If you don't think this looks right, do it again. Try it differently. So I could go back and create another curves adjustment. There it is with this one on. I'll turn it off. I could go back to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Curves. And I say, you know what, this time I'm going to do the opposite. It's not going to be an S curve this time. I'm going to lighten the lights and darken, I'm going to darken the lights and lighten the darks. Well, that one doesn't look quite as good. It made the image not look so good. So the point is that you can experiment and see what makes your image look better. So let me do it again for the next image over here. We'll go back to my layer, layer, new adjustment layer, curves. Say OK. And there in the curves adjustment, I'm going to peg the center. And I do this trick of pegging the center so that I'm concentrating on the dark section of the image and the light section of the image. Do I have to set that point there? No. But to me, it helps to create the curve. I generally get better results out of it. So once again, I'll darken the darks just a little bit. And you'll see that as I do it, it also starts to adjust the top of the curve around that. So I'll say, yeah, right about there. And I might lighten that up just a little bit like that. That gives me my S curve, and we can see it on and off. Bigger change on the monitor than it is on the screen. So this is where it takes some practice, and you need to play around with it. So that's a curves adjustment, and it is photograph specific. So something like this, the curve might not do much. So let me go in and let's try it on this one. Layer, new adjustment layer, curves. And for your exercise, you're going to do it to all of them out of practice. So let's pull this one down just a little bit like that. We'll pull this one up just a little bit like that. Yeah, it does a little bit. It makes the dough just a little bit more yellow. May or may not be desirable. OK, so I've gone through and I've done the curves tutorial, which you're all going to play around with. Now I'm going to move on to 1.4, which is the pop tutorial. And this works really nicely on images with lots of like reds in them. So, or lots of color saturation in them. So sunset would be a great example. So I'm going to pick my sunset picture to do this to. I'm going to turn off the adjustments that I've already done to try to isolate this so you can see just this adjustment applied. And I'm going to do this one by going to the channel mixer again. So I'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to choose Channel Mixer instead. There. But this time, we'll call this Pop. This time, I'm not going to check the box for monochrome. I'm going to work with the channels of the color. So we'll start with the output channel of red. And when I do that, I'm going to change the red value here to a higher number. So we'll say 116, for example. Now, when I do that at 116, I've put too much red in the image, and the image has a little bit of a red tint now. So I need to back off on some of the other colors to make this number equal 100. So I'll take 116 and then I'll do minus 8 in the green and I'll do minus 8 in the blue. So I'll do 116, minus 8, and minus 8 for a total of 100. Then I'll switch my output channel from red to green. And in this one, I'll take the green channel and bump that up to 116. And I'll do the red channel at minus 8 and the blue channel at minus 8. Then I'll go ahead and switch the output channel from green to blue. And I'll take the blue value and put that at 116. Ah, darn it. That's what happens when it's an experiment. I hit backspace too many times and it didn't like me. So this is 116, and this one is minus 8, and this one is minus 8. So there we go. So this pop value, depending on red, green, or blue, essentially the channel is the value that I'm going up to 116, and the other two I'm decreasing. And if we look at this, you probably won't see too much on my screen because it's very subtle. If you look at it on your screen, it pushes and bumps the colors quite a bit. And it's something that can really add a little bit of color to your images. I'll do it again on this image. Let me do it on, well, I'll stick to the 3 images that I've been primarily dealing with. I'll go up to my layer, new adjustment layer, channel mixer. We'll call this one pop. And once again, I'll go through my channels. I'll start with the red channel and go to 116, minus 8, and minus 8. I'll switch to my green channel and say 116. My red and blue will go to minus 8. And I'll go to my blue channel, and this should be minus 8, and 116. Now, the 116 and minus 8 is just a number that seems to work for me. Could you do 120, minus 10, and minus 10? Sure. Could you do 130, minus 15, minus 15? Yeah. Experiment around and see whether those help your image or hurt your image. That's just the happy medium point that seems to work for me. And so it is a very subtle adjustment. It boosts the colors just a little bit. OK, so the next thing, before I move on into Photoshop 1.5, I'm going to point out one other thing, and that is the vibrance versus saturation adjustments. So just like we've been going to layer, new adjustment layer, you'll see that there is a hue and saturation adjustment, and there's also a vibrance adjustment. Remember, if people are in the photo, you're going to probably want to stick with vibrance. I don't have any pictures of people in them right now, so it's not a good illustration. But I would go to new adjustment layer and then to vibrance. And then this is a simple slider. We've got saturation and vibrance. All you're doing is bumping that value up to see more color. I'm going extreme so that hopefully you can see it. Less color, more color. Remember, vibrance is all about the non-skin tones colors, and saturation would be the whole image, either direction. Okay, so I just want to point that out. I don't have a tutorial written. It's just a slider. It's pretty easy, but I wanted to point that out in case you have any photos that have people in them so you know the difference there. So we'll move on into the dodge and burn tutorial. This is Photoshop 1.5, dodge and burn. And we're going to do the dodge and burn a little bit differently than the rest of the tutorials, or the rest of the adjustments that we've applied to date. On all the rest of them, we went to layer, new adjustment layer, and then pick something. For our purposes right now, we're actually going to go to layer, new layer. So it's not an adjustment layer, it's just a regular layer. So I'm going to go to layer, new layer, and I'm going to call this dodge and burn. So there's dodge and burn. Now, a dodge and burn is a way of mimicking the chemical process that you used to go through when you developed film, like in a darkroom. You guys have probably seen this on TV, not actually done it in person. But depending on what chemicals you poured in while you were developing the film, you could selectively darken parts of the image or lighten parts of the image as part of that chemical process. In the world of Photoshop, we can pretend to do it. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to pretend to do it. So I'll call this dodge and burn. Before I say OK, however, there's a couple things I need to do. The first thing I need to do is come down to where it says Mode. And under Mode, we're going to choose Overlay. So Mode needs to be set for Overlay. And then right below that, there's a checkbox for Fill with Overlay Neutral Color 50% Gray. I want to make sure I check that box as well. So it should say Dodge and Burn. Mode should be Overlay. And check the box to Fill with Overlay Neutral Color of 50% Gray. And I'll go ahead and say OK. So this layer, this dodge and burn layer, looks different than the other layers I've been creating. It's actually a gray square, which is a little bit different. So in this case, I'm going to make sure that this layer is highlighted, which it currently is. It's that grayish color. And then I'll come over to my toolbars, and I'll come down to this tool. And I'm not sure whether this is what's showing on yours or not. There are two tools available. It looks kind of like a pin, and underneath it is kind of like a hand. It's making a C-ish. Well, it's a backward C, but you get the idea. The dodge tool selectively lightens parts of the image. The burn tool selectively darkens parts of the image. I'm going to start with the burn tool because it's easier for you guys to see me burn an image. So I'll pick on the burn tool. And when I've selected the burn tool here, I'm going to look at my contextual ribbon that appears at the top of the page. And in that contextual ribbon, I have the ability to change the brush. So right here, the brush is set at 65. If I click that downward facing arrow, I have the ability to adjust the size and the hardness of the brush. The hardness is how sharp an edge is. The size is the radius of the brush altogether. So I'd really like to increase the size of my brush a little bit. So we'll go up. Yeah, maybe a little bit more. Maybe like 500 or 600. Let me type in 600. Yeah, that's a pretty good size, 600. And the hardness I'm going to set at 0 because I want it to be very soft on the edges. I want it to blur on the edges. So my size is set to 600. My hardness is set to 0. I'm ready to perform some burning on my image. By the way, once you have your brush selected and you're starting to work, you can use the bracket keys on the keyboard to increase the brush size or decrease the brush size. And so that's an easy way of making those adjustments after the fact. Now I'm going to start burning the top of the image, and you're going to see as I start to burn the top of the image that it's going to become darker. You guys see how the sky is becoming darker? Like that. And I could come down here to the horizon there and burn that out. When I go to the dodge tool, the lighten tool, same thing. I'll up the size of my brush. My hardness will still be set at 0. I might go a little bit bigger. And I could selectively lighten parts of the shadow in here. Or maybe I want to lighten some of the grass. Maybe like that. So the point is, I'm selectively lightening and darkening parts of the image. The nice thing about doing it this way, where I'm dodging and burning on this layer, is I can turn it on and turn it off to see whether I liked it or I don't like it. You can dodge and burn directly on the photograph. I don't recommend dodging and burning directly on the photograph because you can mess up the original photo. This way, if I mess up too bad or I don't like what it looks like, I can always start again and just turn it off. So this is the preferred way to do dodging and burning. So let me go through that one more time with another image. I'll pick this one. So dodge and burn. I'll go up to image. Layer. I'm not going to go to new adjustment layer this time. I'm just going to go to layer, new layer. I'm going to call this dodge and burn. There we go. And my mode is going to be set to overlay. And I'm going to fill with a neutral 50% gray. By the way, I'll explain what mode set to overlay is next class. So that'll make sense later on. But for right now, just trust me in that. So we'll set the mode to overlay, fill with a neutral 50% gray, and I'll go ahead and say OK. There's my dodge and burn. I'll come on the left side here and choose my burn tool. It's already set a little bit from my last dodging and burning. And now I can come in and I could selectively darken up, say, some of those clouds. Maybe I'd decrease the size of my brush and I'd come in here and I'd darken up that streak a little bit in there. Like that. And maybe I wanted to make some adjustments, so I'd flip back into the dodge tool and I could try to lighten up some of this. One of the problems with dodging and burning is if you're not careful with how you do it, you can end up saying, oh, you know, I really want to lighten this. All right, that's great. Oh, wait, I went too far. Let me go back and let me darken it. Oh, it's not getting back. I'm not doing it. See how I'm darkening around and getting the halo and whatever? Dodging and burning is a very fine adjustment. You just do a little bit and see how it goes. If you do too much, you'll end up with these kinds of haloing weirdness. Same thing happened here in the sky where I had a little bit too light of a patch. So in that case, rather than trying to recover your dodge and burn, just create a new layer and start again. Turn it off, do another new layer, and you'll see how it goes. That's part of this practice process. So go back up to Layer, New Layer, Dodge, and Burn 2, Mode, Overlay, Fill with Neutral 50% Gray. There we go. And now I can go back and say, yeah, let me try that one more time. We're on Burn. Make this a little bit bigger. We'll just selectively darken that up just a little bit like that. Sounds pretty good. Let's give ourselves a little bit of a highlight. Using the Dodge tool, let's make this a little bit bigger. Kind of lighten up that patch just a bit, maybe like that, etc. So you make finer adjustments, and then you say, OK, that's pretty good. Yeah?
How do you make the tool bigger?
So the tool, you can either go up to here and change the size, or you can use the bracket keys on the keyboard. I don't know what the difference is with the brackets, but essentially the key that has the bracket on the right makes it bigger. The key on the left makes it smaller. It's the bracket that goes this way as you're looking at it makes it bigger. And that one, I don't know how you would determine which bracket faces what way. Anyway, you can experiment with it, but the bracket keys. If, however, you have your toolbar up, the bracket keys won't work to change it because your selection is up there. So it has to be closed for the bracket keys to work to change it. Okay? So that's dodging and burning. At this point, you have a layer stack that includes all of the various steps that we went through today. That's a good thing. So now that we have all of the steps that we've gone through today, it's time to save our work. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll go to File, and then I'll go to Save. This is going to save the Photoshop, the .psd version of our file. So let me go into a folder here. I'll create a folder for today. This is the spring of 2019. There we go. And so this is my Photoshop. So it's going to be saved .psd. I could change the name. Say this is ARC 135 photo 2. And then I'll go ahead and save it. The advantage of saving the Photoshop file, by the way, when this comes up to maximize compatibility, just say OK, is I can go back, I can see all my layers, I can turn them on, turn them off, make changes, make adjustments. It's saving everything for me. However, when I go to post this file, I'm going to make a JPEG that has the various edits baked into it. So it's just one file that has the edits in it. So I'm going to turn everything off to start. And I'm going to go ahead and save each file and at each step. So this is a good way of going back. So you're going to end up today with 18 total images that you're going to post, okay, as you go through it. Not a problem. I'll show you how to post them in just a second. So first thing I need to do is save an original version of the file. I'm going to go to the File menu, and we have some different options that are available here to us. If we go to our, sorry, they always change things on me. If we go to Export, we have a couple different options for how we're exporting. There is here a Save for Web legacy. I have always really liked the Save for Web. I think it's a great way of you guys saving images because we can cut the file sizes down to post them. So I'm going to show you the Save for Web legacy, even though it's going to ultimately be kicked out of Photoshop long term. But I think it's a good way of saving these files. So we're going to stick with that. So it's File, and then Export, Save for Web. And when we have Save for Web here, I'm going to change here under my preset. I'm going to change to a JPEG high. Under my preset, we get a preview of what the file looks like. We could press Control-0 to see the whole image if you wanted to. You don't have to. This is my saved version, but I can also do one more thing to edit my file. This is going to make it a lot easier to upload your files long term. I'm going to cut the file size down by changing the image size, whatever the larger number is, whether it's the width or the height. In this case, it would be the width. I'm going to change it to 1,000. So it's under image size here. I'm going to change whatever the width or the height is to be 1,000. It's going to make the file size smaller, make it quicker to upload. It still gives you plenty of credit. We don't need super high resolution images for what we're doing. If you were going to print it, or maybe when you do your assignment, don't do this. Do the full resolution when you do the save. But for our purposes today, we're uploading 18 images. We don't need full file sizes for all 18. So I'm going to change the width to be 1,000 here, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the Save button. And when I do that, it's going to ask me where I want to save it. So I'll go to today's folder. There we go. And I'm going to add, at the end of the file name here, I'm going to add an underscore original. You could name it something else, but this is my original image without any edits applied to it. So I'm saving the underscore original, and I'll go ahead and click on Save. Now I'll turn on my first adjustment, which was black and white. It was this one. And I'll go back to File, Export, Save for Web. I'll come down here. I'll change my width to be 1,000. It remembered that I wanted a JPEG, so that's good. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. I'll then change this from original to black and white, or BW for black and white. You guys get where this is going, right? So I have my black and white, and I'll click Save. Now I'll turn off my black and white, and I'll turn on my levels adjustment. And I'll go ahead and go to File, Export, Save for Web. Same thing. Right here under Width, I'm going to change to 1,000. There it is. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. And this one is going to be Levels. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. Now, you can choose when you're saving these to turn off the levels and just move to the curves, or you can stack them together. If you want the curves and the levels to be on, I'm OK with you doing that as well. So I'll leave both the curves and the levels on. I'll go to File, Export, Save for Web. Change my size here to 1,000. And then click on Save. And I'm going to call this one Curves. And I'll go ahead and save. Next thing would be the pop. And I'll leave them stacked. And I'll go to File, Export, Save for Web. Size set to 1,000. Save. And this one is pop. There we go. And I'll click Save. And then the last one was my dodge and burn right here. I'm going to turn off these and stick with just the dodge and burn here. And I'll go to File, Export, Save for Web. And we'll say 1,000. And this is, I'm going to just do dB for dodge and burn. And then I'll click Save. So I've saved my original plus all 5 of the steps. That gives me 6 total images. You're going to do this with 3 images, so you'll end up with 18 total images. When it comes time to post, that's an awful lot of images to try to post. So we're going to do it using a gallery. So I'm going to go to the course website, and I'm going to create a new post. So I'll come here to New and then Post. All right. And I'll start by going ahead and saying this is exercise 104. And here in the tabs, I'm going to choose the Gallery tab instead of the Content tab. And I'm going to insert gallery or add images. This, by the way, is written out on the... Apparently it's not. It was supposed to be written out on the back of your handout, but it's not. So anyway, great job, Copy Center, right? So when I do that, sorry, let me go back here. So I'm going to insert gallery or add images. I'm going to click on that blue button, and I'll get this here. When I go to select the files and I go find my flash drive, I'm going to select them all at once, or at least in groups of the 6. It would be easiest if you just did all 18 at once and had them done. So here's all of my images. I'll select the first one, select the last one. That gives me all of them. I'll go ahead and click on Open. Remember, I cut the file sizes down, so this would be a little bit shorter. It will upload, and then say crunching, and then go to Show afterward. Perfect. When I'm done, I'll click Save All Changes, like that. So at this point, if you really didn't like the order, if you wanted your original to come first, you could, in these little text boxes, reorder your files. So I could say this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, if you wanted them to be in that order, and then click Save All Changes. Perfect, those are saved. At this point, I can go ahead and close this gallery, like that. So, a couple other things. On the right side here, I'm going to change the format to gallery. And if you get lost in this, of course, I'll sit and help you do this. I'm going to change the format to gallery. And when I do that, when I switch back to my Content tab at the bottom, oh, come on, there we go. There's an option to turn on the slideshow. So this will take all those images and make them a little slideshow for me. That's only available once you switch to the Gallery tab. It still won't let me post because I don't have a featured image, so I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom, say Set Featured Image, and I can actually, I'm the administrator, so I get all the images. You'll see just your images, which makes it easier, but you can also filter by images that are uploaded to this post, which would give you just the images you uploaded and not the rest of them. And you'll pick whatever one that you like. So maybe I'll pick that one, and I'll set that one as the featured image. There it is. Come back over here. We have to categorize it. I'll come down to my exercise 104. There it is. And at this point, I'm ready to publish. I don't actually put anything into the content section. I'll go ahead and publish it. Good. There we go. And now I can go ahead and click on the link to view my post. And there it is. And you see that this shows up with a little slideshow that cycles through my images in the order that I specified. I don't really care about the order. It's not the end of the world if you don't get the order right. You're going to have 18, so there'll be a lot more little dots in here. But that's how you can really concisely post all of those images and then quickly be able to scroll through them. If you get a little bit lost, that's fine. I'll sit with you and help you. I'd rather have you concentrate on the Photoshop section for a while. If you're feeling really comfortable and you want to do an extra set of images, go for it. Give it a shot. The more you practice this, the easier it will become. All right? So I'll let you guys start. I know I talked for a long time today, but I wanted to take my time and really go through it. You guys still have about an hour and 5 minutes to finish the rest of this. I don't think you'll have a problem doing that and getting your post done.